Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I'm your host, David Straggy, and here we have another film discussion here, and we have another host that is taking over. Jake, why don't you let us know what is on the agenda for tonight?
Well, very good. I'm Kodabuki Jake, and of course we're joined here with the usual group here. We got, Dave
Hey.
and Dane.
Hello.
That's,
Hey, I guess.
and Brandon
Hello.
and Katie.
Hi.
All right. And we are looking tonight at the film, the 2008 film Let den Rat Komma in, or Let the Right One In, which is a Swedish film directed by Tomas Alfredson, and it's written by the author of the book on which it's based, John Advid Lindqvist, which is kind of cool that we followed 2 weeks in a row movie based on the book both written by the author. It's kind of very different movie from Princess Bride, though.
You think so, huh?
Very different. And and of course, there will be spoilers. Be aware of that. And did anyone have a burning desire to do a synopsis, or should I just do the brief little one I had?
Hit us, Jake.
All right. Well, I actually like the one-line thing they have on IMDb. Oscar, an overlooked and bullied boy, finds love and revenge through Ellie, a beautiful but peculiar girl. That's the ultra-simplified version, but basically this is a film about a bullied kid who is becoming kind of a warped individual already, who gets a new neighbor who is very mysterious and only comes out at night, and there's a corresponding rise in disappearances and murders. So it's, yeah. So let's see here. I guess
I
we'll
wonder who it could be.
Yeah.
Round, nobody knows.
So basic plot. Well, I mean that's most of the plot. He goes into these two find each other. She tells him, "I cannot be your friend," and eventually becomes his friend regardless. And you've got it's not really a plot intensive movie. It's more about character development, I think. Does anyone have any disagreement or things you really want to add on the plot?
I think
Not
I'll
really.
agree. I think I'll agree with that. So for the people who haven't quite inferred it, the rest of the premise is that so he meets this. So he's a young kid, and he meets like a young girl who turns out to be a vampire. And so that's pretty much it for the plot. It revolves around like her caretaker, like killing people for her, so she can drink their blood. Sometimes she goes out herself and catches people, and then the rest of it is about our main character, like this kid, and like the friendship that he and eventual, I think, relationship that he has with her. So, and it's a fairly straightforward story, but there's a fair bit of depth to it, depending on.
It's a very moody film.
Indeed, like it's kind of a bleak film in a lot of ways.
Right, in some ways. Although the behind the scenes that comes on the DVD, the director claims it has a happy ending. And I'm kind of like,
I saw that as a happy ending. Like, I was sitting there like, "Ah," and I think I actually said out loud, "I love a happy ending."
It's so not happy, though.
Yeah.
I was having a great time. What are you talking about?
I thought it's not being happy from Oscar's perspective.
Well, there are shattered corpses, and it's great.
But like he's doomed to that same life as that caretaker who came before him, which was probably another 12-year-old boy 60 years earlier.
In the American version of this, they actually make that pretty explicit.
Really?
That's who that old guy was.
Right.
But it seems like the boys kind of accept it. So
Well, the way I look
Well,
at it is, I
men
almost
will put up with a whole lot to be with their special ladies.
what was that, Brandon?
I was
Yeah.
gonna say I feel like at that time, the way that the movie at least presents it, I've never read the book, but the way that the movie presents it is it feels like she really was using him in the end in some aspect just because she needed a new caretaker.
Well, and he obviously couldn't stand up for himself, so he needed her too.
Yeah, and she did leave him like for a while, and it was kind of a good thing. Good that she came back when she did. So you
Her timing
sense
was impeccable.
what?
Her timing was impeccable.
In a sense, this young vampire Ailey reminds me of the young vampire in Interview with a Vampire, where she's stuck at that repetitive age of like what is it, 16?
Claudette, right?
Yeah.
I think so.
I
Yeah.
thought about that too. And
Another film that this reminds me of is has anyone heard of a film called Orphan?
No,
I have,
okay.
but I haven't seen it.
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen it, but it's been a long time.
Well, that one has a very young girl who's actually like in her like 60s or 80s or something like that, and she just she goes from adoptive family to adoptive family, but it's because she has a disease that way where she's just
Young forever.
yeah. So
Or it's kind of like if we ever get around to our mermaid scar discussion, that little kid, Masato. But I did think of the Interview of the Vampire idea, but there is a major difference, and that is that in that one, the vampire was surrounded by very adult individuals, was forced to really grow up over the years, but this one has managed. I guess she's more secluded. She's maintained a level of innocence somehow. Not clearly not innocent, but you know what I mean. Like she's not. The other one almost seems like a little monster.
She's still somewhat childlike compared to Claudette, because I mean I read Interview with a Vampire for a class once, and so I remember lines from Claudette where like when they would talk about her, it was like her mind would keep developing even though her body didn't change. And there's one point after I don't know how many decades with Lestat where she's like, why didn't you turn me when I was a little bit older? Because she's jealous that like all the women they're around are like developed as women while she's still like physically a child. And so I was kind of thinking of that while I was watching this.
Yeah, that would be incredibly hard, I think, to be stuck in, well, whatever form you are in. Anyway, that would be hard, but especially if you're a child, because you may mentally be much older than that, obviously centuries old, so you've seen a lot of what there is to experience in the human world and all that, but at the same time you are physically stuck in a shell that cannot age, and so therefore you can't get close to anyone, and it would be a miserable life.
And this would be probably a good time to talk about what we were talking about right before we started with the an element that's hinted at in the film but was more explicit in the book, that apparently Ellie had been. There's a couple points in the movie where she asks Oscar, "What would you do if I'm not a girl?" And the implication is kind of, well, okay, she's a vampire, she's not really a girl, but supposedly she wasn't even a girl before she was turned, and that, like I said, it's only hinted at in the film, and that one scene that is kind of going to bother a lot of Americans, is the closest you come to confirmation of that in the film, I think.
Yeah, which the novel, which I have not read and I would like to, states that I just read this online, that states that she was born a boy and was emasculated by a cruel vampire lord, and so now lives as a girl. And it's I felt like that was that added a lot of dimension to that character, and it's that kind of stuff, no matter what age the person is, for Americans that's very hard to swallow, and I don't think it should be, just because that kind of stuff, as horrible as it is, does happen in the real world, where people get their genitals mutilated, and they go through such horrible, kind of experiences like
Are
that.
you kidding? They're circumcising babies in hospitals every day. As we speak right now, genital mutilation's happening.
Yeah. Well, but you know what I mean? It's like the people go through that in real life, and it's just I think a lot of people don't want to think about that, even in the context of a horror film. But it's just, I don't know, that I felt like that really gave a lot of richness to that character beyond the usual vampire, the gravitas that would come from someone being a vampire. And that would be a lot to go through, and it would be a lot for someone like Oscar to go through to discover that and to not really know how to feel about it.
Well, conversely, I would argue that in my headcanon, I'm going to just ignore all that, because that kind of ruins the entire thing.
Why?
Like, because I view this as like a love story between like these two characters.
Yeah.
And like that whole backstory
Just
yeah,
what?
it just like throws that off.
Well,
I think it can still be a love story. I
Yeah.
just think
I thought it was.
they're two people who need each other.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, love takes a. I mean, I think that honestly, the thing I took away from this story was that love takes unexpected forms, and in this case, it's someone who obviously cannot get close to anyone for very long because she outlives them, and then someone else who is well on his way to becoming a sociopath, basically, who is perfect to be a vampire slave, obviously perfect candidate, except that I do think that there is more to it than just that, because she obviously has gone through her fair share of slaves, over the centuries. But I do think that she has more of a connection with this kid, just because he exhibits a lot of the characteristics of a good vampire slave, in that he will kill for her and does seem to be devoted to her and not bothered by the obvious stuff like her killing and having to drink blood and all that kind of stuff. So I do think that there is a little bit more to it than that, but the point is that even with that backstory in place, I think that it just shows that if love is meant to be, then it can overcome a lot of different people in relationships that last. They tend to come to those relationships with a lot of baggage and scars, and the ones that last are the ones who are able to look at all that and say, I can live with that. And I think that's ultimately what it's about.
I think
Well, I mean, I didn't. Well, all this stuff from the book, like, I mean, I didn't get that kind of impression at all. But if that's how it happened in the book, I guess, then.
Well, what did you think it was?
I mean, I thought it was just like a romance story between like these like two kids. I mean, just one happened to be a vampire.
As opposed to what?
As opposed to like, well, the way you frame it, it sounds like this like purely predatory like thing where, like she just picked him. It's like, oh, I need a replacement soon. That guy. All right, great.
And no, that's not at all. That's not at all how I phrased it. Honestly, that's I think that's appropriate for the relationship that she has with her first caretaker, because she and Oscar, they both have very little empathy for others, except that I think that they both connect in the sense that they are lost souls. But obviously, he is the more subservient to her, just given the nature of the fact that he doesn't really stand up for himself, and also that he, in doing so, he fulfills that classical role of the vampire slave. Which,
Well,
and
I
that
think
that that is one little complaint I will have about this, at least in the movie form, is that if you don't really know a lot of the familiar vampire tropes, then you might be a little bit more confused than necessary. But
Well, I mean, I didn't really get a vampire slave vibe from this. Like with the first
but
guy, it's like he's doing it because he wants to.
well,
well,
but
Take care of her. Like
that's
that
the
was
role. That's the role that he's playing. I mean, vampires have typically they have at least one
I think
human that they
doing
keep around to help them, get victims and help them
oh,
to
when
just
I
survive.
when I hear vampire slave, I hear like thralls. Like almost zombie like.
I got the feeling that the older man that came with Ellie was in fact and could not help himself to help her in the things that he did, and I believe over the time that he spent with her beforehand, even though we didn't see that backstory very much, I believe that he grew a conscience. I believe that he grew a conscience and started to actually care about the people that he killed, because he was kind of dragging the bodies around like, do I have to do
Yeah,
this
it
again?
did sort of seem like that. I'll agree.
Well, actually,
He's getting tired of it. Was the impression I got too.
real
Like he
quick,
just can't do it anymore.
Exactly.
How many victims must I do for you, Master?
I thought that he was just well. That's an interesting interpretation. I was kind of wondering that if he was just dumb, or if he was just not that good at it, or what. Because it seems like Oscar would be a lot smarter about how to do that. Because he was her first caretaker. He was just killing people out in the open, and it was like, come on, man, these are rookie mistakes.
yeah,
I think that he kind of wanted to get caught. I mean, that's what I was feeling towards the end. Is there's almost that feeling that I'm done with this at this point.
Yeah, that was the only thing I was thinking. I was like, maybe he wants to get caught.
Yeah, I got the impression that he was kind of tired of it. Like he had been doing it for so long that he started putting like less and less effort into it, was sort of the feeling that I got. Like the first guy, like in the park, it's like, okay, there's a dog.
I
Go
Yeah.
away, dog.
I don't.
Yeah, it did seem like he kept being in situations where it's like, dude, couldn't you have planned better? You keep getting caught.
Yeah.
Aren't you any good at doing this? Yeah, it
I-
just seemed like he was giving up.
Well,
I was
got
gonna
the
say
impression
this-
that he'd been doing it for like 50 years, and he was like, "Yeah, this is good enough. Whatever."
Well,
I was like, this guy clearly needs to take Ted Bundy lessons on how to do this kind of thing right.
You.
I got the definite impression that he had that he still that he cared for her, but he kind of he had kind of gotten to a point of giving up. Just kind of like, I'm just kind of this guy that's like a noose around her neck kind of at that point. That was the impression I got, that he felt more like a weight than a valued companion. So that might have been why he was getting sloppy.
He didn't feel
But
the love.
this might be a good point to actually get into the actual character by character descriptions. And I guess we're talking right now, of course, about Hakan, however you pronounce that, who's played by Per Ragnar in the film, and was played by Richard Jenkins in the remake. But yeah, he's kind of. What do y'all think of like his? What ended up happening with him? How that ended up playing out?
Which one was he?
The caretaker guy, he dumped acid on his face, like to conceal his identity or whatever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that was
that was
super gnarly.
that
That
was a
scene
cool
might have
effect.
been my favorite of the whole movie, just how that played out. It was pretty. That was the scene that I was like, oh, okay, I probably won't show my kid this movie.
Yeah,
because
that was a nice
knew-
effect.
he knew people had seen him with Ellie, so that's why he did it.
Right.
Which it's funny that he had enough sense to do that, and yet he couldn't, drain people's blood out in like a concealed private place instead of out in the middle of the park where the passersby can find you.
Well, he was trying to do it in like that apartment or whatever it was, but like that dude's friends came over, and it was like, well, we're not getting out of this.
That was in like the school locker or like the locker room, I thought, but
I wasn't sure exactly what they were.
yeah, even then it was like he could have kept the guy under for longer, or could have, gagged him or something. I mean, he slit the guy's throat in the beginning, and it's like, you could have done that pretty quick, and it could have been like a quick one and done, 5 minutes you're out of there. But I don't know. But yeah, he was as far as vampire slaves go, he was a pretty poor one. I think he gets enough.
Oh, I think that he was more of a foreshadowing.
He needs to go back to school.
Go back to murder school.
That's right. He needs to take lessons from Renfield.
I look at him basically as Oscar's future in a lot of ways. I mean, basically, once she has used him up and ready to spit him out, essentially, it's like you've done, you've been your usefulness, and now I'll need to find another younger one. And that's how I took the ending of it. Was basically this is just another in a long line. That the whole thing had been set up for her to seek it out, and maybe even purposefully saying, well, this guy is starting to dry up. I need to get somebody fresh.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I like how everybody had like the ultra negative take on what I thought was like a really happy and beautiful ending, but
Well,
I
I
mean,
think it
that's
just
technically
depends where it
correct.
hits
Just
And actually, might be a good time to talk about the character of Ellie, played by Lena Anderson. I didn't take her as negatively as everyone seems to be. I kind of felt she had some lingering tenderness for that one scene where she finally kills her former caretaker. I didn't see it as a purely bloodthirsty scene. I felt like there was a little bit
it's almost kind of gentle, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have a negative impression of her at all. Honestly, I thought she was far from predatory, other than the obvious necessity of having to drink blood and all that. But I mean, just as a personality, I thought that she actually was rather tender when it came to putting her first, slave out of his misery. And then, I do think that she had an attraction of sorts to Oscar, in the sense of like to broken people finding some kind of connection. Now, granted, he's going to still serve that role because that's just how these things work. But at the same time,
the necessity of her existence. So
exactly. But at the same time, I mean, I never really got a sadistic, malicious vibe from her, which you often do get from some kinds of vampires, because just the very nature of being a vampire, it's like that rewards predatory master slave kind of behavior. But I felt like she was, quite reserved and, not happy with how the hand that life dealt her. And I can't exactly blame her for that. So yeah, I mean, I think the ending's very bittersweet in that sense, because you can look at it very bleakly or you can look at it very happily, because I mean, it is happy for the short term. Who knows what's going to happen?
Bittersweet now.
I look
Who
at
knows what's going to happen to
we're
him
ruining
later?
Justin's view of it. Oh,
mean,
come on.
I look at this film.
I'm legit kind of mad, actually. Yeah.
Oh no.
I look at this film a little differently, because I don't look at it from the vampirism standpoint. I look at it from seeing how Oscar was bullied.
Well, that's definitely a huge factor.
Oh, that was kind of great.
I don't think this
The
is
hockey
just
stick.
about the vampirism or the vampire story that is being told around it. I think that there is very much a display of bullyism in his school with his with his supposed friends. And
it's never really implied that they are actually his friends. Like they're picking on him like
really
every
does
time.
a great job
Yeah,
of
they seem
painting
like
a picture of it. Paints a very good picture of what this kid's everyday life is like and where his self-worth is. So we kind of get an understanding that he is maybe fit for this role with
Right.
Oh
Ellie.
yeah.
And
Well,
that
that
it brings up a very good point, which is that the director and the author have both gone on record as saying that they don't really particularly care for vampire stories. The director actually did not want to do a horror film, but they framed it to him as a story about this kid being bullied and this connection between these two. And that was what got him to sign on and take an interest in the story. So definitely from the standpoint of the directors and or director and the writer, looking at it as a story of a kid being bullied and finding a friend that has vampires in it could be
yeah.
considered.
Well, the So
It's something in the
I can
water over
definitely
there, isn't it?
well, I can definitely see that, and then also the movie did remind me a lot of another Swedish film from 1985 called My Life as a Dog by Lasse Hallström, which that's a great film. Similar
By Lassie.
setup. Well, yeah, that's his first name, Lasse Hallström. And it's similar kind of premise, no vampires or anything, but like the idea, similar kind of two odd ducks who are of that kind of newly pubescent age, kind of finding each other and trying to navigate life and not being appreciated and being picked on, that kind of stuff. So I could definitely see the similarities there. And Dustin, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ruin this for you even more because apparently, in the book, her first caretaker was a pedophile, and
Yes, I heard that as well.
yes,
Yeah, that was something that kind of bothered me too. Because it was like, well, after a point, there would have to be, but I kind of just didn't think about it.
well,
I dealt with it by not thinking about it too much.
well, it's interesting. I mean, that would have been an interesting thing to explore, but I don't know if we would have had room for it without making the movie at least a half hour longer, and ultimately it would be rather extraneous to the larger theme, the larger story, which is these two kids getting closer together. But I mean, at the same time, it does kind of provide somewhat of a incentive for him to keep staying outside, the first caretaker to keep staying outside of just the normal vampire slave trope, which is where they're usually put under some kind of either spell or they feel that kind of addiction, or they just are enraptured by the vampire, him or herself.
I've seen True Blood. I know how this works.
Right, or just even if the guy, if we are to believe that the caretaker just doesn't have a will to do anything else. Like, I guess that's possible, even if he's not charmed or whatever in his brain about it. He just, that's where his self-esteem is, where he wants to be. Perhaps it's a picture of, it's something that imitates life a little bit in certain ways.
Yeah. Well,
and I think Oscar is a good example of somebody who could be that,
definitely,
for the rest of his life.
Well, and not only that, but like there are people in real life who will sign up willingly to do very strange, bizarre things, including like there are people who there are some people who will like willingly be eaten by someone else, and it's like no one forced them to do that. They signed on for it, so it's like there are people who will stay in situations that a normal person would be like, why are you in this situation? But
that reminds me of whenever I think of something like that, I'm reminded of that line from, I think it's American Wedding. It's like, and he even shaved his genitals, which would baffle most cultures around the world. Like, it's just like a running gag in that movie. Like, the main character like does something ridiculous, and like his dad finds out about it, and every time his dad like mentions it, he's just completely bewildered that anybody would have had that idea in the first place. So
Yeah,
kind of makes me think of
I
that.
would think that people like Evil Knievel or even Houdini or daredevils of the over time. These are people who will go out and do things daringly,
And look no further than Alice Cooper and his wife. There's this great video about them, with them talking about their about what has made their relationship last for so many years. And he summed it up as being that you look at this other person, and for all their flaws, all the worst aspects of themselves, and the other person says, I can live with that. And that's basically the same kind of situation here. Both characters see the worst aspects of each other, and it's okay, and in its
I think
own,
that's exactly it.
yeah,
right
in its own messed up way, it's a testament to what makes love last, is that you see someone at their worst and you're there for them anyway. And it's an extreme example of that, but still, it's it's a very nice, it's a good message ultimately.
And I
Another-
think you have to decide if that means love to you or not, as the person watching it.
Oh yeah, which I mean, to me, I think that is a very good definition of true love, is not only being able to deal with the worst aspects of someone and not be turned away by it, but also like there's another movie called Amour, which Michael Haneke did, and that
Great
is
film.
all about, yeah, I love it. Very hard to watch, but a great film. But it's all about that idea of like not only putting up with the worst parts of a person, but also doing that which is so unbelievably difficult to do, like heartbreaking to do, for the one that you love more than anything, and that's kind of fits into this as well. But I think both of those things are what define a lasting loving relationship. And so again, extreme example in this case, but
It's like, Dean, we've seen you in that lipstick and that high heels. We love you, though.
that's right.
Right?
Yeah, but it's just, that's an extreme example, but it's a good representation of what that looks like.
I just had a brief
Oh, see,
comment
Dustin,
on.
it can
I
still
just,
be love story.
I just had a brief comment on the Alice Cooper thing. It turns out he's like surprisingly normal and even likes to golf, which kind of takes away a lot of the fun,
No,
He's
it doesn't.
great. He's
No, it's-
super
I
great.
think
to
I know
talk
he's
to.
great. You just sort of wish he'd be like on all the time. Like, can you imagine how
Why?
fun that would be if like that character was just out in public? Like,
Well,
like you're at
that-
like Ralph's or whatever in California, and then just like Alice Cooper, like in the makeup, is like
Oh,
walking
yeah.
around, just going about his day.
That would be,
Sometimes
Yeah.
that happens.
yeah,
be-
but that would also be ludicrous because
It
he's
would
a
be
person.
wonderful.
I'll be honest.
Ask people at gas stations between here and Indianapolis, Indiana, if they've ever had two people dressed up like skeletons come in there at some odd hour of the day to use the bathroom. Like Ryan and I, when we're out, like sometimes our makeup is on and we're out. I have no doubt that Alice Cooper's been out in his full getup or whatever. Like it does exist. That is not like
Well,
a
I'm
unicorn. It really is.
Well,
And
that's
I'm
the
sure
world I
that-
want to live in.
I mean, I'm sure that happens. I mean, I've
Totally.
I've walked into stores in costumes and stuff. So I mean, it definitely happens. But it's also like the ones you really got to worry about are the ones like Bill Cosby, who look so like normal on the outside, but on the inside they're really monstrous. And that's why like I have a lot of respect for people like Alice Cooper, because they let it all out, and then you're like, oh yeah, they're really nice and sweet and everything. And then it's that's what I look for in a person, is kind of that which people don't expect, and again, I think that's what the movie's partially about, is that it's this relationship that defies a lot of the conventional wisdom.
Well, for me, I think one of my favorite things, like, just in general, is like people that act completely normal but have like a totally bizarre appearance. So, I mean, I find that like incredibly funny and delightful, like pretty much no matter what. So I think that's kind of where I come from.
All right.
With it.
So I think we've wandered a little bit here.
Yeah, well, hey, it was an okay wonder. We've done worse.
So just a real quick, as far as character, we didn't really specifically hit Oscar, but we've come back to him again and again. Did anyone have any additional thoughts on him?
Yeah, Oscar, we've made some allusions to Oscar having kind of like antisocial or potentially dangerous like tendencies. Like early on, we see him like stroking like that knife. We've seen him like practice stabbing with the knife, and it's like, okay, he's got some problems. And then you see like his bullies, and it's like, oh, okay, I think I get why.
Yeah, you do, but I mean, that was a good portrait of the birth of a sociopath. Which, and let me also very quickly get our definitions here. So, sociopaths and psychopaths are similar, but they are not the same because, well, several reasons, but not the least of which is that psychopaths are born and sociopaths are made. And it seemed to me like he was pretty clearly getting made into a violent person. And so therefore I put him in the category of sociopath. And also his lack of empathy, again, seems like something that's learned as opposed to something that is inborn. But in his case, yeah, I can definitely see where his sociopathic tendencies are coming in. And again, we in America, we tend to be way too timid to talk about that kind of behavior in children in general, and especially in a cinematic format, which is really too bad because that's something that we need to think about, I think, all the time, because how else are we going to change it or help the situation? But that's that was something that I think was very brave of this film to do, because not a lot of films are willing to do that. And again, it's kind of in a similar situation to something like My Life as a Dog, because I remembered one of my classmates was really off put by some elements in that film just because they were mature and the characters were 12 and all that. But it's like, it's not like this stuff doesn't happen in the real world. It needs to be talked about.
There's another movie that what is it? Moonrise Kingdom? Is that
Yeah.
where the young couple kind of they have
that's a good one.
First encounters. Yeah, and I think it's done really well. You just made me think of that.
Another aspect of the character development that I think is worth noting is again, I saw that there wasn't much in the behind the scenes, but the director had a couple of insights. And one was he mentioned that the adults around these kids are not really all that aware. Like they notice things, but they don't really notice everything around them. And that part of the reason, you could say part of the reason why Oscar is becoming what he is because the adults who could be putting him on the right path are not really looking right at. Really, Ellie is like the only one in the film who really looks at him. Everyone
who pays him any attention. Exactly. Like I got that feeling too.
It does seem kind of on that same line. It does seem like the adult authority figures, at least in the school, it does seem like they're played up for laughs. Almost, what they reminded me of, like the exercise guy, the swimming guy who goes out fire. At the end. In a weird way, he reminded me a lot of Mr. Frond on Bob's Burgers, or like a lot of the authority figures in here reminded me of characters that you would see on a show like Bob's Burgers, in the sense that they're portrayed as being buffoons and just incapable of handling kids or seeing 2 feet in front of their faces. When it comes to bullying and abuse and that kind of stuff.
Again, this seems to be set like in an age that where teachers and parents didn't really pay attention to their kids as much. They just let them go outdoors and didn't think nothing of it until they started hearing about the murders and started, okay, let's bring the children in. It's time.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was
Dave brings up a good point about timing. Like, that's absolutely, I think, how it was in the 70s and to some degree in the 80s too. Parents just sort of disconnecting from their kids. I mean, not to throw my own parents under the bus, but they were nowhere near as involved in my life as I am in my daughter's. They didn't know what was going on for me. We didn't talk about it. I think that's perhaps part of that time period for a lot, this more aware parenting. Like, I think the way my parents grew up was like their parents weren't that engaged. It was in that time where it was like, yeah, kids just go out and run, seen but not heard, all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a generational thing.
Go play up the lawn darts.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
and then my parents were really, really controlling, and and they're of the baby boomer generation. So I mean, it just, I think in general, yeah, older parenting styles were much more hands off, and then now the pendulum's kind of swung the other way to where kids pretty much can't go outside the house without being supervised or having tracking devices implanted in them practically. And so what do? They go and they stay inside, and that was, of course, that's with the advent of the internet and everything, and so it just becomes even more isolating. And this film, though, is a period piece in that it is set during the 80s, and that's why you see the cassette player and everything. Although I do like that it's not quite as in love with its period in the same way that, like, say, Stranger Things is. It's like the setting is really very tangential to the overall story. It could work at any time, and that's how it's being done right.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't even realize this was set in the 80s because it's very not in your face about it.
Exactly. And that's the way to do it, because ultimately any story that's worth hearing needs to be able to work more or less, not in a vacuum, but it's like the themes of it resonate regardless of the time period that it's in, even though obviously stories are a product of their time and place.
You realize the building in which Oscar and young Ellie in fact live. It's like in like a circular kind of a structure where you got a building on one side and a building on the other, and it seems like they're kind of in a courtyard.
It's like that's exactly what it is, a courtyard within a complex of apartments.
So in a sense, you get that they're in a kind of a shut off area, like within these, like
a Soviet bloc apartment.
Exactly.
I think it's really important for us to mention also that this is shot completely over snow. Like, it's winter, it's snowy everywhere, and I feel like that the cold and the snow really adds an element to this too.
Oh yeah,
isolation.
Entirely ice cold winter, because when he dragged the body over to that little pool, there was water flowing.
And keep in mind also, you said the Soviet bloc or whatever. This was in Sweden, which is not wasn't a Soviet bloc country, but the point is, in Europe they tend to have more close fitting, close proximity kind of communal housing than we do necessarily, even though we've got plenty of that too. But it's like the classical American model of the suburban home with the big lawn and everything. Like, that's a very American construct. And in England and other European countries, they tend to be a little bit more closely populated, I think, because also they don't have as much just simple land real estate to work with as we do. But that's also just more of a cultural thing. So I think that can also play a factor into it. Like, and the walls are very thin. If you remember, in the apartment, the walls are very thin. They're able to hear what the other person in the other room is saying pretty easily, and they're able to hear each other's Morse code scratches and everything. So, yeah, I think that that's also kind of an aspect of it, because I've seen videos of people who've like taken trips to Vienna or something, and they're in like a 3-star hotel, and it's like the room that they're in is practically a closet or something with very paper thin walls. So, again, that's important for the context of the whole thing. So it feeds into that kind of closeness, paranoia, and isolation on top of the snow that's always there.
It also is important for Oscar's character in that he does learn Morse code in order to communicate better with Ellie, which you see them doing that through the walls, but you also see that in that final shot with her in the coffin. So that was pretty cool. As far as the character, well, the apartment complex, I guess the last thing to hit on character would be the group of friends who also live there, the people like York and Virginia and Locke and all them. What do y'all think of them? I guess the two that stood out for me were Virginia, who survives an attack, and the cat guy. I can't remember which one he was, but yeah.
Yeah, they didn't seem to serve a whole lot of purpose, at least to me.
I like
they were
the
just kind of there.
I like the cat guy a lot because it's interesting because it's there are some of those, as far as playing true to typical horror movie tropes, but then also not feeding into them too much. Like, you will have those nosy neighbor characters who know that something weird's going on over next door, and what do we do? So that kind of character. Except I like that it was a crazy cat man instead of a crazy cat lady, and also I liked that you had the cats very clearly be able to sense that something was wrong here, and especially given that so often cats are seen as evil in the context of other gothic horror creatures like witches and that kind of stuff. But it's like, look at that, the cats actually can sense, that something bad's going on, and they're not gonna lay down on the job there. I was like, go kitties. And yeah, so that was nice. Plus, again, subverting of the usual crazy cat lady trope there, because my dad has said, if he hadn't married my mom, that he would have ended up having a small apartment with like a ton of cats.
And
I thought that cat attack scene was pretty wicked.
Yeah,
that
Also
was
funny.
freaky. Like,
It actually did make me chuckle.
I like that a lot.
I used to work in an animal shelter with a lot of cats, and so it was like, yeah, cats could do it. Like you. I remember something they told me in training, like, you don't call the hospital for dog bites, but you call like 911 for cat bites, like, because cat bites are like a lot worse. They just don't happen as much.
That's interesting. I've had cats my whole life, and I've never had to go to the hospital for a cat bite. But my daughter got bit by a dog and had to get like 6 stitches.
That's awful.
It kind of depends on how bad the cat wants to hurt you.
Well, my mom also got bit by a poodle when she was young, and I've had nothing but good experiences with cats. Not only and dogs, but especially cats. Like my cat or other people's cats. Like, they tend to be very sweet to me. But I think it's mostly just knowing how to handle them, and obviously they don't take kindly to vampires. So, if you're a vampire,
all of them.
Well, if you're a vampire, stay away from cats because they will not mess around. But in general, I've known cats to be very, very sweet. But maybe I just have good luck.
It's like that movie Skin Crawlers, I believe it is, the Stephen King film.
Sleepwalkers?
Sleepwalkers, thank you. I was trying to think of the name, where the cats are considered the, of course, bad guy, and they end up overcrowding their lawn. trying to hunt them down.
Yeah,
I haven't
as
seen
a
it yet, but I have seen the poster art. So
as a
It's fun.
as a big time lifelong cat lover, I always get sick of seeing the cats as the villains trope, in especially in children's films, but like it's nice in this movie to see cats, serving the role that dogs typically do in movies about ghosts where they can see the ghosts and no one else can. But like here, the cats know that there's a vampire and they know that that means to attack. So it's like good for you, cats, and good for you, filmmakers, for showing that cats don't always have to be the evil villains.
well,
So the
cats
cat scene,
do that in Cat's Eye.
I know the cat scene was one of the more technically involved parts of the film. What were y'all's overall impressions of the effects, the makeup, all that kind of stuff?
I thought
Well,
the cat scene looked. Oh, go ahead, Kitty.
I just wanted to add a little interesting tidbit that I had learned in doing some research about the CGI in this film. That the most of the CGI was actually used to change the size of people's eyes, either make them bigger or smaller by like 10% in order to sort of send a subtle subconscious message to the viewer that something was off, or just by using eyes as a form of expression and by making them bigger or smaller, and how that would affect how they were viewed. I thought that was a really interesting technique and something I had never heard of being done before.
Huh.
Yeah, that. I actually did notice that some people's eyes were bigger or smaller than others in a atypical fashion. Which, speaking of people's appearances, very quickly,
Ellie seemed to have like really strange eyes, so I guess that's why, huh?
that and also this is more of a casting thing, but I did kind of feel like with Oscar there that his appearance matched more of the conventional vampire look, in the sense that he had like those eyes that he looks like he hasn't slept in a long time, really pale skin, kind of that uh
Even though
detached look, and then
Leroy look.
The Lestat foppery.
yeah, and then Ellie, the only really clue would have been just her dark hair and everything, but other than that, there wasn't really much to denote her vampiric nature. So I thought that was actually kind of a nice twist on everything, that our human protagonist looks and acts more like your conventional vampire for most of it.
Said, I don't know if anyone else felt this way or not. There were a few shots where she reminded me a lot of Elijah Wood, and I have seen him play some pretty creepy characters. So,
It's the expressive face and eyes. Like, I guess it took them a year to cast the boy and girl because they were trying to cast them as a pair and see how they worked off of each other, because what they were going for was a yin and a yang, basically, with these two characters. And they, obviously they eventually found it in the girl, but what they were looking for was specifically facial expressions. Because of there being such a little dialogue, they wanted these kids to be able to portray emotion and feeling just through their expressions on their faces, which lends to why they were also changing the size of their eyes too in certain scenes.
Well, and that's good. That's good casting and that's good acting, because again, the words themselves, at least to me, the words themselves are not really what's important. It's always what's behind the words and what's in between the words in this case, because what they ultimately say to each other is not all that profound in and of itself, but it's the expressions and the noises and the looks in between the words that I think really sell their relationship. And that's a testament to those actors and to the casting, because those two actors had really good chemistry.
Yeah, they played really well together.
Absolutely. Like, you could see even another good benchmark for any kind of movie with supernatural elements in it of any kind, or anything out of the realm of the ordinary. I find a good rule of thumb is, if nothing supernatural or extraordinary was going on in this story whatsoever, would you want to watch a movie about this person or these people? If the answer is yes, then you've probably got a good story going, got a good movie there that's not dependent only on the gimmick that you're trying to push. And in this case, the character relationships are strong and the necessary chemistry is there to where I think even if it wasn't a vampire story, that it would work, and it would be interesting to watch.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. So they even kind of make it a little bit ambiguous in the beginning as to what kind of story it's going to be. Like, we don't get vampires shot at us right away.
And that's actually one of the reasons why in my intro I was kind of coy about it, because it actually is a reveal in the film. And it's also noted on IMDb, they only say the word vampire once in the entire film. But it was promoted, it was sold as a vampire film. It was definitely it's like the spoilers there in the advertising. But if you're actually watching the film, it is kind of a slow reveal, and I kind of like the way they did that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's some little things that I don't know if I would say that I didn't like, just things that I observed that were noticeably different than how American films are made, for better or for worse. One of which is that it did kind of move a little bit slow. I think that the pacing could have been increased such that the movie could have been like an hour and a half as opposed to like almost 2 hours. And
yeah, it was quite long.
Yeah, you wouldn't have missed anything. And again, that's purely just because of American cinema tends to be a lot faster paced, and I do tend to like movies that take their time. It's just this maybe was just a hair bit slow, so I might have increased the pacing just a teensy bit, not too much, because you do want to preserve those great performances. So there was that, but then also because I am familiar with so much of vampire lore and like the whole needing to be invited in, I mean, it was that part I think was fleshed out for people that don't really know much about vampires, and I don't think that it's completely unfriendly to people that don't know anything about vampires, but at the same time I think you get your full enjoyment by knowing about like the fact that vampires, when they become vampires, then they stay stuck at whatever age they're at, or the being invited in thing, or taking a slave to help them find victims, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, the movie doesn't explain the lore all that much. Not that it really needs to over explain it like a lot of movies do, but I can already tell that if you were not really into vampires all that much, I don't know if it would necessarily sway you.
Well, I think maybe they did it that way because at this point, like culturally, like so many people know about those tropes that it doesn't really need to be laid out. So I don't think that's really a problem with the script.
You don't really need to. Yeah, you don't need to over explain it. I was more thinking about how the movie itself got pretty rave reviews and everything, and it, I think they were largely deserved. I was just more thinking about how and this is me personally, I didn't really find it scary per se, but at the same time, that wasn't really what was holding me. What was holding me was the love story and the just growing up aspect of it.
I think go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, I think we're definitely kind of running into some of the more generalized stuff that kind of, I guess, would come a little later in the. I did want to at least hit on the artistic aspects of the film before we get into that general discussion. So I guess no one's really had much to say on effects. What about the music? Did anyone? I liked it a lot. I liked the way that it was kind of almost an odd fit in a way, because it was
operatic kind of. Or...
Yeah, I kind of like that. Everyone else think?
I thought
the music was good.
Very dramatic.
I like the music at the end. That was well used.
Yeah, they had a sense of darkness and drama to it.
I think pathos is the word I would probably use.
Yeah, that's good.
Pathos, gravitas, a lot of synonyms there.
Mhm.
But yeah, the music was great. I didn't really notice it at many other points during the film. But this didn't seem to be a terribly like music heavy one.
No, there was a lot of quiet moments in this one.
Right. I think I read a comment actually, the scene where Ellie comes in uninvited. I think the director commented that they originally had music there and they didn't think it worked dramatically, so they took it out. Like
Yeah.
it worked really well the way they ended up doing it in the final film, I thought. It was a really good scene, effective scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, the exact quote was that they said that it was American in a bad way, and I can definitely see what they're saying, because in America we tend to not trust the audience to appreciate a moment and to appreciate something significant without a musical cue telling us how to feel, and that often reeks of not trusting your audience. And the fact that there was no music there, it helped to sell it a lot better than music would have.
Yeah, I liked that scene because I mean that's a trope that the vampires have to be invited in, but I can't think of very many things where we actually see why, what happens if they're not invited and they try to come in anyway. Like in True Blood, they're just thrown right out the door. Like they just get sucked out like a wind tunnel.
Actually, okay, and that is one reason why I kind of wanted to come back to that in just a moment, but I guess we're there now. I forgot, and my apologies. I forgot when we started to go around and ask everyone's impressions of the film. Mine are actually tied up in that, so that's why I wanted to talk about that all at once. But if y'all wanted to go ahead, I guess we could combine, like, since we skipped that at the beginning, talk about like your first impression, whether this was a first watch and whatnot, but also go ahead and do the favorite scene or favorite aspects, if that works. Do that all at
Yeah,
once.
that totally
Sure,
works.
go for it.
So, why don't Dustin? Why don't you do that first?
So I saw the American version, 3 or 4. Oops, sorry about the loud noise there. So I saw the American remake a few years ago, and I thought it was pretty good. And then I saw this original version of the film tonight. Turned out I'd had it on DVD for like 2 years, and it was just in the pile of stuff I hadn't watched yet. I mean, I thought it was pretty good. Like, I really enjoyed it, and I would say that the original that we watched and the American version are pretty comparable. Because I didn't remember. I remember there being like some differences, of course, but I think overall you get about the same quality story. This one is just like a little bit more, I want to say artsy, in terms of like how it's shot. So plus there are like a handful of like cultural things I didn't really catch too.
It's more European in its pacing and its production quality.
Definitely. And as for favorite scene, so I kind of have two. So I think my first favorite scene is when after Ellie's told Oscar, it's like, next time they mess with you, hit them back. And then they're all like out like ice skating or whatever, like on a field trip, and the bullies are like, I'm gonna come over there and push you over. Well, if you come over here, I'll hit you with the stick. And the bully's like, you won't do it. And then he just like hits him with the hockey stick, and like the kid's like, and like blood's everywhere. Like I love that because it's like, well, you were warned. And then the scene at the end where Ellie rescues him from that kid and what I think was his older brother. So the bully and his brother and like some of their friends, they like hold Oscar, like they hold his head under water in a swimming pool, and it's like, so if you stay down for less than 3 minutes, we're gonna stab one of your eyes out. And so it's like, well, he's dead. And then like the bully's like body parts start falling into the pool, and she's like, hi, like, and it's like, yeah, she's back, and I really enjoyed that. And the one bully who hasn't been like dismembered is just like crying in the corner. Like I loved that. That was great. So it actually sort of ties into. I know a lot of people hate the Rob Zombie Halloween remake, but my favorite scene in that is where, like, as a child, Michael Myers surprises that bully in the woods and just beats him to death with that stick. Like,
Yeah.
I loved that scene because it's like something that you're like, why don't more people do stuff like this? Like it just makes sense. So I enjoyed those scenes for that reason.
Psychological intimidation, which I liked his remakes. I actually liked his second one better than the first one, but
I liked them both.
Yeah, they're not original series caliber, but they're decent for what they are. But anyway, I have not seen Let Me In. I would like to after having seen this, and this is my first time seeing it just a few minutes ago, and favorite scene or overall impressions. It was quite. I think it was very good. It wasn't. I don't know if it was necessarily, I remember it was, Roger Ebert was saying it was the best modern vampire film. And, I guess I looked at it so much as like a young love kind of story that had a vampire theme to it. And, so in that sense, I mean, I don't think it was the best vampire movie in the sense of it being scary or visceral or anything, but it was in terms of a, small scale human story, which I always like those. But favorite scene on that level is probably where she comes in and snuggles with him at night, just because well, there's a lot of very good character stuff going on there because it's the kind of the young love aspect of it. And also there's just the fact that that's so unlike what a normal person would do. And she also didn't fully wipe her mouth off, so she still got some blood on there, but he also doesn't turn around either. Because I guess he's partially embarrassed that she's not wearing anything underneath, but also, kind of like thrilled but scared at the same time, and wanting to have it go, somewhere deeper, but also not wanting to push it too far, further than she's willing to go. And it's also her confessing that she wasn't really a girl, and you can take that multiple ways because she isn't really a girl mentally, let alone having been born one physically. So it works on multiple levels. But I think that scene, I think, kind of sums up the movie in a way, just because it's very unconventional. It's very it's a scene that I think people in America probably wouldn't shoot, and yet it doesn't feel exploitive in any way. It feels very just real and human and sweet.
Tender, I think, is the word you're looking for.
Yeah, and again, a lot of really essential character aspects are communicated in a very short amount of time.
So, Dave, what about your thoughts?
Well, I'd first heard about Let the Right One In, believe it or not, from my fiance, and because she'd seen a trailer for this original one, and we saw it through the copy that she picked up, and then I later picked it up myself. My first impressions of it were not as grand as everyone else's. I wasn't a fan of it at first, but over time, after seeing it a couple of times and seeing it again just yesterday again, I've grown to somewhat enjoy this modern take on it, and I understand its value to the film community. My I guess one of my favorite scenes, I would have to say the cats. I would have to say the cats jumping all over the lady and then bringing her to the hospital after that. That was one of my favorite scenes, and I'd have to agree with Dustin. That ending scene was just phenomenal. I mean, the beheading in the pool, just spot on. So
it's like, yeah, fuck these guys.
All right. So, Brandon, your thoughts?
Well, this, of course, is my fourth time seeing it. Kind of evens things out because I've seen it twice in the sub and twice in the English dub. When I watched it last night, I was just like, my head hurts too much to read. So this is perfect. And I've enjoyed it. I think, actually, I think you were the one who first introduced me to this film. But it was very surreal for me. Being introduced to it before, actually, the Chloe Grace Moritz one came out. And almost unlike anything I had seen prior to at the time. So it was a very interesting experience the first time I'd actually seen it. I do feel I identify a lot with Oscar as a character, which is why I do agree with Dustin on one of my favorite scenes being towards the ice skating, where he finally strikes back and stands up to the bully. And, of course, followed by, again, that scene at the pool, which I just thought that was very interesting and very well done, where you just see the carnage kind of splaying out without actually having to see the carnage, if you know what I mean.
well,
Exactly.
in that particular scene, I don't think you really needed to see the carnage. I think you needed to have it suggested.
Yeah, and I think it actually works better that you're not seeing Ellie just like pulling arms off of people. You know, it keeps it kind of grounded.
Yep. All right, and Katie, is this your first time seeing this? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this was my first time. I don't even know if I remember ever even hearing about it. I think I've heard the title thrown around here or there, but I didn't have a lot of expectations going in at all. And I tend to like the coming of age stories, and I also tend to like vampire stories. So I liked that it was kind of a combination of those two things. And it held my interest. So yeah, I thought it was a successful watch. I'm interested now maybe to see the American version and see what I think of that and maybe compare. But my favorite part, I think, was probably the scene with the caretaker at the end of his life when he's in the hospital. And I really dug the reveal of like the side of his melted off face. That was really cool. And probably my favorite effect of the film. So that was my favorite scene.
If Two-Face were real, I imagined he'd look something like that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the design's been done. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, and for me personally, this is a film that I've seen a few times over the years. I've seen this is at least the third, maybe the fourth, and I know I've seen Let Me In at least once. I think Let Me In was a really faithful sequel in a lot of ways, but they definitely Americanized certain elements of it.
Sequel.
But the pacing being one of them, it's worth noting that the director of this is the same guy who did Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is a movie I thought had a glacial pacing. But it's definitely some pacing here. But I'm a little bit ashamed to say that I was introduced to the film while reading a review for Twilight. Because this came out the same time Twilight did. It actually had a limited American run for about 2 months and then got a full run about the same time. And I remember reading a review where they said it was a shame that the vampire film everyone was going to see was Twilight.
Well, yeah.
Well, that was like the critical consensus from the start was if you want to see a vampire film, go see Let the Right One In. And I had actually wanted to pre-order this, but I never got around to it. I ended up purchasing it and watching it. But it's also worth noting that I watched it with my brother who does not watch slow films, does not watch subtitles, and he loved the movie. So it does have broad appeal, which is cool. But also, this was the part I wanted to mention as far as the folklore and stuff. I actually was not familiar with the idea that vampires had to be invited in. I don't believe that was in Bram Stoker, if I'm correct.
It was not in Dracula. It has been in some other folklore. Which the other there's a lot of different things that people either choose to talk about or not. One of which is like running water, a hawthorn bush, silver, certain
Right.
things that people do touch on or not. And some of the more common ones they do touch on, like not going out in the daytime because of the sun and, that kind of stuff. They didn't really do holy objects, but
I think they did it in what was that? A movie. You did it, Brewster.
Fright Night?
Fright Night. They did it in Fright Night, where you can't. You have to be invited in. I know
I
that.
didn't recall Fright Night until about a year ago. So, but so it's notable for me because I really like that. And like I said, one of my favorite scenes was the scene where she came in uninvited, and she like starts bleeding and bleeding, and then finally he's like, "You can come in," just that moment of he relents and he's like, please stop, and that was a really effective scene, I thought. And I also do agree that I love that scene in the pool. You guys know I'm not the fan of gore that everyone else here is. I love it when it's done just off screen, and that was what I liked so much about that scene. I felt bad that the one boy who really didn't want to be there was one of the ones that was killed, but that he was still there.
Oh no, he was alive. He was in the benches, like weeping.
No, the
fine.
other kid, the other kid that was more obviously didn't want to be there. I think he was the one that got beheaded. If I wasn't,
No, he wasn't. That was the dude's older brother who was like
No,
ringleading the guy who threatened to stab the kid's eye out was the one who got beheaded. What are you talking about?
He was the one holding him underwater.
There were three of them that
Yeah,
actually
there were
got
three of them. Yes.
Oh, I guess I missed a corpse then.
It was hard to see them all, wasn't it?
I don't know. They all look alike.
One thing that no one mentioned yet that I did like, as far as the very little dialogue there was one I liked, and that was there's two times in the movie where Oscar asks her, "How old are you?" And the first time she's like, 12, about. And then the second time she says, "I'm 12, but I've been 12 a very long time."
mhm.
And I like the way that was done. I was like, that was a pretty nice way of communicating that. So,
That
Well,
was a
also,
cool line, yeah,
I like that
that.
he in that first scene. I like that he doesn't really let her get off easy, because people will try and give you the brush off with, weird answers to basic questions, and he doesn't let her get off the hook. And I think that says a lot about his character and also about the fact that both of them he especially he's just willing to cut through the superficiality, that goes into a lot of first, impressions. And then I think with that gets further with their other relationship, or with their relationship as it gets going further. Oh yeah, I remember. Just very quickly, the interesting kind of reversal on the whole vampires have to be invited in thing. If you saw Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Francis Ford Coppola adaptation.
I think that's the best Dracula in my opinion.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite movies of all time. But like, what's
Agreed.
cool about that is there Dracula invites Jonathan Harker into his castle. He welcomes him into his space, and that's what Francis Ford Coppola himself was reminded of in The Godfather and in gangster culture, that the mafia doesn't typically do much unless you invite them in, and or you allow yourself to be used by them, and then once they're in you, then they don't get out. And so it's kind of similar there, and in that case it's more of Dracula providing a very reasonable facade with which to get Jonathan Harker's passive acceptance of that. So it's an interesting reversal on that whole notion, except there he's the literal gatekeeper, and here, someone like Oscar is the gatekeeper of the physical space that the vampire has to get into.
Yeah, and actually, I never really thought about that. It's like, Dracula made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I do see also that scene, and I do agree also another scene I liked was the scene with the former caretaker where she says, "Let me in," and he's like, kind of gestures that I can't say anything, but then he just goes to the window and lets her do what she needs to do. I do like that scene too. I thought that was a really good scene, and the very end was really good too. But anyway, I guess we probably it's about time to. Did anyone have any other really big stuff they wanted to comment on? Any other burning issues or observations that we haven't gotten to?
Well, the woman who got bit, and she had a rather burning issue when they opened the blinds.
Indeed.
Yeah, so one of Ellie's after her caretaker dies, like Ellie is out like hunting people on her own, and she bites somebody but isn't able to kill them before she's kind of chased off. And so we go through like a little subplot where that person becomes a vampire, and so they don't seem to quite understand like what they are or what's going on until like the very end. And so they're in the hospital bed, and she's like, could you open the blinds? Knowing what will happen. And so the guy opens the blinds, and she just immediately bursts into flames and dies.
But she figured that out remarkably quickly, despite being a normal person who I assume is not as well versed in vampire lore as your typical horror movie person would be. But I could be wrong.
Well,
but
she saw the bites on her
yeah.
neck. She realized she had like a craving for blood. She was like sniffing her own bandage.
Yeah.
And then when she tried to like look at the lights, like right after the attack, when she opened the window right after the attack, like the sunlight was like painful for her. So she got a lot of pretty strong signs right away.
There also a heated scene where she tried to eat or drink or something and started vomiting up blood, but they ended up taking that out. And I have a feeling, like Dustin, you said earlier, you felt like a lot of those characters seemed a little extraneous. I haven't read the novel either, but I have a feeling they had a much bigger part in the novel, and they were probably scaled down for the film. And so that was probably what that is.
I can believe that. That makes sense to me.
So I guess if we're all good to go, we should go ahead and do the final go around, final closings. That sound good?
Sounds great.
All right, Katie, you want to lead us off?
Yeah, sure. I'm Katie Cadaver from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm a horror artist and plus-size alternative model and burlesque performer and Trauma with Trauma Entertainment and Dead Girl with Dead Girl's Dark Coffin Classics and the makeup artist for horror punk band Rat Bat Spider. And you can find me on all social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Patreon, all that good stuff. So look me up, Katie Cadaver.
Oh, very good. Dane?
I am Dane Kyle, independent filmmaker out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And this week I'm going to be recording the commentary track for my segment of the anthology film for We Are Many, which will be debuting this year. I'm in my shorts. Other shorts are included in other anthologies, which are going to be Clownsploitation and Drive-In Grindhouse, which have now been designated as Grindsploitation 7 and 8, respectively. And I'm a part of another one, Creepypasta the Movie. And in the meantime, I'm gearing up to do a 5th short for a 5th anthology. Going to be shooting that this Sunday, and then trying to get my first feature going all the while, just trying to get some interest on the production level in that way. Hopefully it can be produced on a decent on a decently produced level.
Very good. Dustin, you want to go?
Well, I'm a horror collector here in Milwaukee. So I also have started a channel for my horror collecting, and that's at the Crypt of Horrors here on YouTube. I'm also on Twitter under the Crypt of Horrors, and I'm on Instagram with my collection at DHR Hunter, which very soon will probably be changed to, you guessed it, the Crypt of Horrors. So I'm a regular here on Inside Movies Galore, and you can also listen to me over at Pop Culture Weekly, also on YouTube. Some of my friends are putting on the Twisted Dreams Horror Film Festival here in Milwaukee in April, so come check that out. We have Joe Bob Briggs, so a lot of fun stuff that we do here. I'm also at some point working on writing some reviews for Inside Movies Galore. I just kind of have a lot going on, but it's something that's going to happen eventually. So stay tuned across all platforms and dimensions.
Very good. Brandon, where are you from, what you do, and so forth?
Yes. I a YouTube channel called Septum Send versus the World. We talk about all things physical media. Of course, it is Oscar season. So we are doing many Oscar-themed videos, top 15 lists, and occasionally reviews. There are no reviews that I know of this time, Oscar-wise. Of course, stay tuned. This week, we are going to be airing our predictions up on this Thursday for the awards. And we even have an Oscar-themed pickup video this Wednesday night. So let's all have fun, and hopefully next week we'll see how accurate our predictions really are.
Hey, thank you. And I'm Jake, and I also frequently guest on Septum Sin versus the World, where, occasionally have my own solo videos and also contribute, as he said, top 15s and prediction video that we've got coming up. I also have a few videos on my own channel, Kodabudiki Jake, that just got posted recently. Very, very short. There will be more coming soon. As it starts to warm up a bit, it is more of a nature-themed channel. And in the meantime, I actually got to film a small role today, but it's for an instructional video. Probably never, but still, I like to dabble in that once in a while. It's always fun to get involved in different production aspects. And that's all I got for now. And I'm going to hand it off to Dave to do his intro and also wrap us up for the evening.
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, my name is David Straggy. I normally host Inside Movies Galore from time to time, but as you all know, everybody is involved. Lately, I've been actually getting our podcast ready for the other avenues that we have gotten them on. Also, thanks to Brandon, I got a new cool kick-ass intro for my new Delusions of Grandeur. Thanks to some of my ideas, mixed with some of his editing expertise. Appreciate that, man.
Not a problem.
And so definitely check that out. I did put it on the Toy Box reviews, which was recently. I have a separate YouTube channel for my reviews now. And if it's okay with everyone here, I'm actually going to be setting up a totally different page for Inside Movies Galore, so that I can we can start mainstreaming the podcast as I edit the intros in and the other episodes from like 2 years ago up onto these other avenues. So other than that, I know I just spoke to Shanta on getting her intro in, so hopefully I get to hear back from her and go from there. So everyone say good night.
Good night.
Right.
Like, share, and subscribe. Do it.